What kind of person screams at you for planting roses in your own yard? That's what I kept asking myself as Karen McAllister, our HOA president, stood on my front lawn, her face redder than the blooms I'd just put in the ground. Her voice was a siren, shrill and unyielding, tearing through the quiet of our suburban street. "You're ruining the neighborhood aesthetic," she bellowed, pointing a manicured finger at my flower bed. I stood there, shovel in hand, dirt smudged on my jeans, trying to process how my attempt at beauty had turned into a battlefield. My name's Emma, and I'd only been in Willow Creek for 3 months. But I was already learning that Karen ruled this place like a queen nobody dared to cross. She was a woman who thrived on control, her presence as imposing as her frame, her words sharp enough to cut through any defense. I'd heard the stories neighbors fined for unapproved mailboxes, kids scolded for chalk drawings on driveways, but I never thought I'd be her next target. It started innocently enough. My husband, Nate, and I had moved here for a fresh start after years in a cramped city apartment. We wanted a home, a yard, a place to grow roots, literal and figurative. The roses were my first step, a nod to my grandmother who'd taught me to find peace in gardening. But Karen saw my roses as rebellion. "You didn't submit a landscaping request," she snapped, waving a copy of the HOA bylaws like a weapon. I tried to explain that I'd checked the rules, that roses weren't banned, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes gleamed with the thrill of power, and I realized this wasn't about flowers. It was about her. I stood my ground, calmly telling her I'd plant what I wanted on my property. That's when she lost it. Her voice hit a new pitch, and she stepped closer, her shadow swallowing the sunlight. "You'll regret this, Emma," she hissed, before storming off, her heels clicking like a countdown to war. The next morning, I woke to an email from the HOA. A fine $500 for unauthorized landscaping. My stomach churned. Nate read it over my shoulder, his jaw tight. "She's out of control," he muttered. We weren't rich. That money was a week's groceries, a car payment. I felt violated, like Karen had reached into our lives and taken something sacred. But I wasn't going to pay. Not without a fight. I started digging, not into the dirt this time, but into the HOA bylaws. Hours blurred as I pored over the fine print, cross-referencing every rule Karen had cited. And there it was, buried in Section 4. 2. Residents may plant non-invasive flora in personal yards without prior approval, provided they adhere to height and maintenance standards. My roses were well within those limits. Karen's fine was baseless. Armed with this, I drafted a polite but firm email to the HOA board, attaching photos of my roses and quoting the bylaws. I hit send, expecting a quick resolution. Instead, I got silence. Days passed, and then a second fine arrived, $750. This time for non-compliance with board directives. I was livid. Nate suggested we go to the next HOA meeting, confront Karen publicly. I agreed, though my heart pounded at the thought. Karen wasn't just a bully. She was a force, a woman who'd built her kingdom on fear. But I wasn't backing down. I printed out the bylaws, highlighted the relevant sections, and prepared to face her. The meeting was in the community center, a sterile room with fluorescent lights and folding chairs. Neighbors filled the seats, their faces a mix of curiosity and unease. Karen sat at the front, her posture regal, her smile tight. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my voice steadier than I felt. My roses comply with the bylaws, I said, holding up my evidence. These fines are unjustified. The room went quiet. All eyes on Karen. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed. The board has the authority to interpret the rules as we see fit, she said smoothly. Your roses are a disruption. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I pressed on, quoting the bylaws verbatim. But Karen cut me off. This isn't a debate. Emma, pay the fines or face consequences. That's when the twist came. A moment that shifted everything. Mrs. Larson, a quiet widow who lived across the street, stood up. Her hands trembled, but her voice was clear. Karen, you fined me last year for my bird feeder. I paid because I was scared. But Emma's right, these rules are being twisted. The room erupted in whispers. Another neighbor, Mr. Patel, chimed in, admitting he'd been fined for his daughter's basketball hoop. One by one, people spoke up, their stories painting a picture of Karen's reign of petty tyranny. I saw her facade crack, just for a second, as she realized she wasn't untouchable. But Karen wasn't done. The next day, she showed up at our house again, this time with a clipboard and a smug grin. I'm issuing a formal notice of violation, she said, thrusting a paper at me. You have 48 hours to remove those roses, or we'll escalate. Nate, who'd been watching from the porch, stepped forward. Escalate how? He asked, his voice low but firm. Karen's grin widened. You'll see. That night, we barely slept, the weight of her threat hanging over us. I started researching local laws, desperate for a way out. That's when I found it. Our county had strict regulations on HOA overreach. Karen's notices and fines were treading dangerously close to harassment. I called a lawyer friend, Sarah, who agreed to look into it. She was blunt. Karen's playing a dangerous game. You could sue for harassment. But let's start with something simpler. She suggested a trespass warning legal notice that Karen wasn't allowed on our property without permission. It felt drastic, but I was done being bullied. Sarah drafted the paperwork, and I filed it with the sheriff's office. I didn't tell anyone, not even Nate, until it was done. I wanted to believe it wouldn't come to that Karen would back off. But I was wrong. 2 days later, she was back, this time with a landscaping crew in tow. Rip them out, she barked, pointing at my roses. I ran outside, my heart racing. You can't do this, I shouted. Karen laughed. A cold, triumphant sound. This is HOA property now. That's when the sheriff's car pulled up. Deputy Harris, a no-nonsense man with a clipboard of his own, stepped out. Karen McAllister, he asked. She froze, her confidence faltering. You're hereby served with a trespass warrant, he said, handing her the document. You're not to set foot on this property again. The crew stopped, confused, as Karen's face drained of color. She stammered, trying to argue, but the deputy was unmoved. Ma'am, I suggest you leave. Now. The air felt electric as Karen stood there, clutching the warrant, her empire crumbling in real time. The landscaping crew backed away, their tools idle, as neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion. I saw Mrs. Larson watching from her porch, her expression a mix of shock and quiet triumph. Karen's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. She'd overplayed her hand, and now the consequences were staring her down. This isn't over, she spat, her voice shaking, before turning and marching to her car. The deputy watched her go, then nodded to me. "Call if she comes back," he said, before driving off. Nate put his arm around me, and for the first time in days, I breathed. But the victory was bittersweet. The neighborhood was buzzing, but not everyone was on our side. Some saw me as the troublemaker, the new girl who dared to challenge Karen. Others, like Mrs. Larson and Mr. Patel, started organizing, talking about reforming the HOA or dissolving it entirely. I wanted to believe we'd won, but Karen's parting words echoed in my head. She wasn't the type to let go easily. Sure enough, a week later, we got a letter from her lawyer, claiming defamation and demanding an apology. It was laughable, but it reminded me how far she'd go to save face. Sarah, my lawyer friend, wasn't fazed. "She's bluffing," she said. "Her actions are on record, and the sheriff's report backs you up." We filed a counterclaim, citing harassment and abuse of power. The legal battle was draining, but it gave others courage. At the next HOA meeting, the room was packed. Neighbors who'd been silent before now spoke out, sharing stories of Karen's overreach. Mr. Patel proposed a vote to remove her as president. Karen tried to shut it down, banging her gavel, but the crowd was done listening. When the votes were counted, she was out, replaced by Mrs. Larson, who promised transparency and fairness. Karen's downfall was swift after that. Without her title, her influence evaporated. Neighbors stopped fearing her, and her fines and notices were overturned one by one. The HOA board audited her decisions, uncovering a pattern of selective enforcement. Friends of hers had been exempt from rules while others were targeted. There was even talk of a lawsuit against her for misusing HOA funds. Karen stopped showing up to meetings, and soon, a for sale sign appeared in her yard. I heard she moved to another state, chasing a fresh start where her reputation couldn't follow. As for me, I kept my roses. They bloomed brighter that spring, a quiet rebellion against the control that had tried to choke them out. Nate and I hosted a barbecue, inviting the neighbors who'd stood with us. Mrs. Larson brought her famous peach cobbler, and Mr. Patel's daughter shot hoops in our driveway, free from Karen's rules. We laughed and shared stories, the weight of the past months lifting with every smile. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about roses or fine sit, was about standing up, about refusing to let fear dictate your life. Looking back, I see now how easy it is to let someone like Karen take control, how fear can silence even the strongest voices. But I also learned that courage is contagious. One voice, one act of defiance, can spark a fire that burns through the darkest corners. My roses are still there, a reminder that beauty can grow even in the hardest ground, as long as you're willing to fight for it. And fight we did.